It is time for an upgrade in my workshop. I am taking 2 pieces of particle board, some 2x4s I bought, and turning them into a folding workbench. The first thing I did was cut up 2x4s for the support beams. The particle board is 7 foot long, so I cut 4 8-foot 2x4s. For the legs, I cut up 4 8-foot boards into 2 32-inch and 2 16-inch boards each. After everything was cut up, I assembled the legs. Done with the first set, took a look at it and realized my first mistake. I forgot to round over the top of the legs so the legs could fold in. Grabbing the legs that hadn't been put together yet, I used a jigsaw to round over the edges. What made this easier was finally being able to use those 3D printed corner jigs that I had a friend print like 2 years ago. Once the legs were rounded over, I assembled the rest and started with attaching them to the support beams. I lined up the beams with the legs using clamps to hold them together. I used a 3/8 bolt for the hinges on the legs. I then drilled holes into the legs and the support beams for the bolts. When attaching the bolts, I realized I overestimated the 6-inch bolts I bought and realized they were too long for the task. I grabbed a hacksaw and was about halfway through cutting it when I realized my second mistake. The solution was simple. I could just return them and buy shorter bolts. I finished sawing the bolt I started, and then bought new ones and returned the old ones. I then attached the first tabletop with wood screws and set up the first half of the workbench. It was at this moment that I realized my third mistake. I'll let you find the mistake. The next thing I did was attach locks to the legs. When I attached them, I realized that the locks needed to be lowered into the wood so the workbench would close flush. I grabbed my compact router, cut a hole to fit the lock. At the beginning of the project, I thought I had everything figured out and that I wouldn't take long to make it. I figured that I would run into issues, that is how it's always going to happen. What I didn't realize was that the adjustments and overestimations that made when I realized this, I knew it would take longer than expected. Next, I took the lesson I made from the first half of it and was able to make the legs actually fold out in the right spot. The whole lessons I learned, I was able to make the second half with ease. Next came rectifying the mistakes and adding the locks I missed. First, I readjusted the legs, having to take the whole thing apart to get the drill to line up where I wanted it. I then aligned the legs, drilled new holes, and then adding the bolts and reattaching the tabletop. After reattaching the door hinges, I added the locks to the second half of the table. I then added the 1-footers left over from the support beams and attached them to the ends of the table and added locks for storage. It was at this point I was done, and here are the results.